Right ahead. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, it seems to ask me to leave the meeting at the moment. There we go. Right, sorry about that. I seem to have a little bit of a technical hitch in that it locked me back out again as soon as it let me in. Is everyone here?
I'm here, Oliver, but I can't get my video on at the moment. It's playing up. I'll come in and go out again.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. So, welcome to Cabinet on Tuesday, the 12th of January, 2021. It is now 10:01. So we'll start with the main agenda, if that's all right. So item 1, apologies for absence. I think
I'm not aware of any.
From Alan, is that right, Emma?
I wasn't aware of that, but that's fine. Thank you.
He's currently unavailable. He may join us later, depending on timing.
Thank you.
Item 2, announcements from Chair and or Head of Paid Service. Mark, do you have anything you want to say?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest on the papers today?
Sorry, Chair, it's just occurred to me under the fees and charges, I've got a bookshop that has an A board, and I think from previous, I'm looking to fill. I think I've not been able to vote on that and not take part in the debate.
That's right, Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 4, record of decisions, which we have. Are we happy with the record of decisions that we have in front of us? Do you want me to go general nodding of the head? Do I need to take a vote on that? Emma?
We just quickly run through it just for just to be spot on. So Councillor Hemsley?
For.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson?
For.
And Councillor Wilby?
For.
Excellent, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move on to, sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with the agenda again. We move on to item 5, which is items raised by scrutiny. I don't believe there are any. Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 6, which is an update on housing infrastructure funding. It's a verbal update. So I believe that's to Councillor Brown.
Right, I thought it was going to be a penny, but I'm happy to repeat what I said last night, Chair.
Thank you.
If you just give me a few moments to pull that up. I think it was that one there. Right. That's not the one, my apologies. Just give me a moment. Yeah, got it. It's not too many things here from last night. Yeah, that's us better. Yeah, just to update everybody, I did give an update to council last night, but I will give it formally here this morning, just so everybody's up to speed, and anyone who wasn't at the meeting last night, particularly members of the public, you'll be able to hear. On the housing infrastructure grant, work is continuing to reach agreement on the 2 key documents. That's the Grant Determination Agreement and the Allocations Agreement for the Housing Infrastructure Funding Grant. The Grant Determination Agreement, which I'll refer to as GDA for simplicity and speed, this is a standard Homes England document which is extremely reluctant to modify for this unique project. Both the MOD and Rutland County Council negotiated very firmly to make suitable amendments. And while some of these have been accepted, Homes England has generally maintained its standard position. The GDA is almost complete, with the exception of some details on dates and other wording changes requested in the last few days by Homes England on the schedules, which are attached to the GDA. And we continue to work on those with them. The Allocation Agreement is a document which spells out the roles and responsibilities between Rutland County Council and the MOD in executing the GDA. In the last couple of weeks, including over Christmas and New Year, as the Grant Determination Agreement has reached its advanced stages, discussions started to and have progressed on the Allocations Agreement between the MOD and ourselves. It's hoped that within the next week or so, the finalised copy of these documents can be agreed with the MOD, Homes England and the respective legal advisors. Assuming the remaining items outstanding can be satisfactorily resolved in the coming days, we're aiming to produce clean copies of all the documents and a hard copy bundle for each member. This is not an insignificant piece of work, as each bundle will run to over 200 pages. The target is to publish the documents to members only by the end of this month, along with a draft covering report, which will be used as the basis for the 3 formal processes which follow: scrutiny, cabinet and council. Unfortunately, due to the confidentiality requirements of both Homes England and the MOD, these document bundles will be exempt and not available to the general public. It is our intention, however, subject to agreement with the MOD and Homes England, to use as far as possible as we can a digital copy of the HIV bid documentation for members. Some of the information on these documents will be redacted due to commercial sensitivity required by the MOD in their future discussions with potential land sales development partners. Where possible, this documentation will also be made available on the St George's website for the public to view. Timing of this is uncertain because they need to reach agreement with the MOD and Homes England, but the documents have been reviewed to identify those which cannot be issued and those that require redaction. Once we're in a position to have an agreement on the GDA and the allocations agreement, it's the intention of governance to issue a programme to members which will include dates for a full members briefing, adequate time for scrutiny, and time for review of the documents prior to Cabinet and full Council considering the proposals. I'd like to just put on record here at Cabinet this morning the hard work and many long hours that both the Director of Places and the Monitoring Officer have put in over the last 9 months to bring this peak of work to conclusion, especially when they've had to continue to manage their day-to-day responsibilities in these extremely difficult COVID times. Whether you support this project or not, I believe we should recognise the dedication of all our officers at these very difficult times. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much for that update. Do we have any questions? No? Excellent. I would like to now move on to COVID-19, item 7, use of emergency powers. Obviously, last night I gave an update to Cabinet on where we were with we ended 2020 with significant tightening of restrictions, and beginning of 2021 we went into a national lockdown, and I think it is very important that we remain with the emergency powers as they are. There is a report here that outlines some of those things, but it is important that we allow the flexibility for the senior management team and Mark in particular to be able to make decisions if necessary. But we have already altered the rules that have worked under, and I think that we now have a good way of being able to move forwards. But the important rules are stay at home, please, absolutely. Remember hands, face, space, and keep your homes ventilated. Test if you have symptoms, self-isolate if you test positive, and follow any contact tracing guidance. I think, Mark, I don't know whether you want to add anything to the powers or whether we just want to go to the vote on it.
I think the only thing I'd add, Councillor Hemsley, is obviously after publication, that it just shows you how fast moving this is. The report is immediately out of date in terms of talking about Tier 3, and here we sit here in lockdown. So it just shows the importance of being able to respond quickly and make some decisions in relation to the pandemic.
Absolutely, yeah, it is very fast moving, and I think almost, hopefully we're not going to have any fast moving upwards. Hopefully now we will consolidate. Vaccination program will help, and we can start seeing some of these return to Tier 3 maybe, but that's maybe being hopeful. Are we happy to go to the vote on the Cabinet notes the present position in Rutland in respect of COVID-19 and notes the continued applicability of the civil emergency delegation? Does anyone have any questions on that before we go to the vote? No, thank you very much. So Emma, can you take the roll call on that for me, please?
Thank you. So Councillor Hemsley.
4.
Councillor Brown.
Sorry. Oh.
You're there.
I am somewhere, hold on.
We can hear you.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was on mute. Yeah, in favour. I was looking for my mute.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
For.
And Councillor Wilby.
Or
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 8, which is the draft 2021-22 revenue and capital budget. Are you taking this, Gordon, or is Sav starting on this?
I'll start it, Chairman, but I've asked staff to come in on some of the key points later on.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, the proposal in front of Cabinet this morning is that we approve for consultation the general fund budget of 42 million, an increase in council tax of 1.99% with a further 1% of the adult social care precept, of which 3% is available over 2 years. A capital programme is detailed in the report. The creation of an earmark reserve for ash dieback, as identified in the report, and also increasing the minimum reserve from 2 million to 3 million to reflect the increased risk profile. The advice from the Council's Section 151 officer, Sav, should be noted, and I will ask Sav to particularly look at that. The medium-term financial outlook, and also the commitment we require to address the deficit position, and again, Sav will comment on that. There will be the comment on representations to government about the unfair funding. We note also that the funding may change between now and the time we set the budget, because the local government settlement was only an interim statement that has yet to be finalised. And to note that additional revenue and capital may be occurred in 21-22 relating to underspends in the current year, and monies carried forward. There will be a deficit potentially in the collection fund, of which a significant part will be our share. And we'll also be considering later this morning the Treasury management and capital investment strategy. The purpose of this report to Cabinet is that we are required to set a balanced budget and agree the level of council tax in the context of our medium-term financial plan. The report presents a draft budget for consultation. We're not agreeing this budget this morning. It's only for agree to go out to consultation to the community, and for the budget to be ultimately set in February 2021. Unfortunately, the 21-22 local government finance settlement gives the council less funding than 2021, despite all the talk about new funding for local authorities. And I'll mention the exact sum later. The draft budget for Rutland therefore relies on £2.6 million of reserves to balance the books. This is not good practice, and it is not sustainable. Like many other councils, Rutland is living beyond its means, and will have to take action to address the position. The £2.6 million gap arises from ongoing pressures and real-term funding reductions at this time, when demand and spending on key services continues to increase. The government defines the amount of core funding that councils spend as spending power, or has available for spend as spending power. Since 2013-14, Rutland's spending power has increased by 21% in absolute terms, but the government funded element of this has reduced by 35%. And the council tax spending power, that which we raise from our residents, has risen by 53%. We are now, in this coming year, in a situation where 81% of our funding comes from council tax. This is extremely high when compared to the vast majority of many other authorities. I think there's less than 10 authorities in this position. The reduction of 35% in government funding is compounded by the fact that Rutland receives much less than other councils with the same functions. If we were to receive the average of unitary authorities, we would receive a further £120 per head, and that would mean an extra £4 million in funding. And we wouldn't be concerned about our current deficit, or for that matter, council tax increase this year. Since 2013-14, the spending power's increase of 20% is broadly in line with inflation. However, that doesn't fully reflect the additional costs that we've incurred through additional legislation, regulations and policy decisions made by government, and in particular demand from existing services, such as adult social care and children's areas. We have statutory duties which we must execute. For example, if a child is in risk, we must take them into care. We have no option. And therefore, we have to do that whether we have the money or not to comply with those statutory duties. Whilst future funding is unclear, various reforms will take place in the next year or so. And there are lots of risk, including the long-term impact of COVID-19, which could have an impact on the Council's financial position, not just in the current financial year, the budget year, but in subsequent years, and particularly in areas such as our property income. We have received significant grants, to be fair to government, to support the impact of COVID. But we are uncertain as to demand on these grants at this point in time. And therefore, we're making sure that we have those available to deal with what impact COVID might have both now and over the few months and even into next year and even into next winter, because nobody knows what might happen in these situations. So, as clearly stated in the report, the Council must commit to producing a balanced budget, one that does not rely on reserves in the year after the current budget year, that's 23-24, and therefore the Council must start now to close that gap. It should aim to make savings in the current year and be underspent against its 21-22 budget by at least £500,000. It should also commence work on other projects that enable it to reduce reliance on reserves. The proposal to raise the council tax is in fact only 3% against the 5% allowed. And that increases the gap by a further £500,000. And I know that the Section 151 officer will comment on that. I'd like to draw your attention to local government finance settlement. That's in paragraph 3.2 and onwards. In 21-22, nationally, 61% of spending power came from council tax. As I mentioned earlier, that's 81% in Rutland. So you can see that we are well in excess of that number. Now, you could ask, why is that the case? Why have we got such high council tax? I think it's an item of history going back to 2013-14, in particular, when a needs analysis was created. But I think I need to reassure residents that while we may have the highest council tax in the country, we spend less per household than the average unitary authority. We are a very efficient organisation. We are tight, we don't spend money unnecessarily. And that's seen by the evidence. We were rated as #1 in adult social care in the country, and that wasn't just in terms of the service we provided, but in terms of how efficiently we provided that service. We recycle more. We're in the top 25 authorities in recycling in the country. Our roads are high quality, as you will see if you drive into our neighbouring larger authorities. There are many examples of where, as an authority, we perform in the top tier, although we seem to be funded in the bottom tier, sadly. So looking at table under 3.2.3, under total government funding, you will note that under 2021-22, we have a reduction in total government funding from 10.7 million to 10.3 million, whereas council tax yet again increases from 27.8 million to 28.4 million. And if you look over the last 6 years, our council tax has gone from 22 million to 28 million. You know, that's a very significant increase, over 25% increase over that point in time. I'd also draw your attention to paragraph or note 5 on that same table. In Rutland, 50% of business rates are paid to government. 1% is paid to the fire authority, and we are due to retain 49% as part of our funding, our spending funding that we get from government. Unfortunately, as a situation that occurred during 2013-2014, based on needs analysis, government decided that they would restrict that money by a further £1 million. So we have £1 million of further tariff, which we have to pay to government out of that 49% retained. We believe this is unfair. and we're certainly lobbying government for this to be eliminated, given the other circumstances that I've identified this morning. So the council tax principle for this year is that there's an allowance of up to 2% before a referendum is required, plus a further 3% increase in adult social care precept, which is available over a 2-year period. The funding available assumes a 3% tax increase for the coming year. And that decision obviously will be discussed later this morning, and also with scrutiny and with the in the consultation with the our community. So those are the key points I'd like to raise this morning. I think the financial position is such that we must aim to make those reductions in the coming year and to reduce the reliance on the reserves. Alongside that, we must also identify how we can reduce the deficit in 22-23. That's a key element, and it's a commitment that Council will need to make when it looks at the budget in February. And I think also we fully support the Section 151's officer that we should hold a minimum reserve of 3 million. I think at this point I'd like to ask Sav to comment on the council tax and the cost reduction requirements and the minimum reserves. I think those are the 3 key areas that he would like to make some comments to Cabinet on. Sav.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brown. As the Council's Chief Financial Officer, I wanted to make 4 key points today. And my job is obviously to advise the members, advise the members about the financial position we're in and what we need to do about it. The first key point is around the setting of the budget this year, and in particular, the fact that the budget requires £2.6 million worth of funding from reserves, from earmarked reserves and general fund reserves to be balanced. I mean, reserves are there to be used for one-off purposes. They're not really there to be used on an ongoing basis to fund everyday expenditure. And I think Councillor Brown quite rightly said in his presentation that this is poor practice. It's not really acceptable, and it's certainly not acceptable for any length of time. What that means is that we, as an authority, do need to take action in this coming year to minimise the use of reserves. Yes, the budget says we're going to use £2.6 million. Our job, working together, is to minimise the use of reserves in the year. And the only way we can do that, very simply, is to stop spending. We need to stop spending to reduce that 2.6 million to as little as possible. That's the task that we as officers and members have for the next year, and it's one that we've already started, but we must do that. We cannot afford really to use £2.6 million worth of reserves, and we need to reduce that as much as we can. I think the report talks about, can we get nearer to 2 million? Yes, but ideally it would be less than that. What the effect of that would be to slow down the attrition of the general fund and earmark reserves that we have. So that's point 1. We've got a deficit of 2.6 million. We must beat that deficit by stopping spending. The second point is more about the medium term, which is if we look at our medium term financial plan, the medium term financial plan clearly states that that 2.6 million problem that we have will continue if we don't do something in the medium term. So clearly, in the medium term, we need to prioritise, reshape services, think about what we are going to deliver for our public. Fundamentally, whatever those services and shape of services look like, we need to make sure we're living within our means. So in the next, as soon as possible really, but in the next 12 months, we need to start some projects, some of which have already begun in relation to leisure and waste management, for example. We need to start some projects that will help us reshape services, reprioritise. And fundamentally, look to reduce that 2.6 million reliance on reserves to less than £1 million next year. Ideally, I would like that to be zero next year. I think we all would. I think realistically, if we can move that to nearer the £1 million mark with the balances that we have, we can manage that. And then we can work in subsequent years to reduce that £1 million down to zero. But there's a clear message from me is we must live within our means in the medium term, and we must prioritise services, rework and remodel, reshape services, anything we think we need to do to do that. So that's my second key point. Medium term action is required, but we need to start that now. The third key point is in relation to council tax. And Councillor Brown has spoken about the rules around council tax and the opportunity that we have, or that has been given to us by government. The draft report assumes, as Councillor Brown said, a general increase of 1.99% and then a further 1% for the social care precept, the adult social care precept, bringing us to a total of 3%. My advice as Chief Financial Officer is that we need to think carefully about that decision. If we were to go to a 5% increase, in other words, take the maximum flexibility that the government has given us, it would give us in this year alone an additional £500,000, reducing our deficit therefore to 2.1 million. Now, I appreciate what a difficult decision council tax is. From a financial point of view, my advice to members is that we should move towards that 5%, and I would encourage members to think about that before we get to the voting day when we look at the final budget. But I do understand that it is a big decision, and of course, as we go out to consultation, members of the public and others may have strong views on that. My final point relates to the recommended level of reserves. Again, a point that Councillor Brown has referenced. We need a minimum level of reserves, and that's there to cushion us in any particular year if there is extraordinary expenditure or new trends that mean that we have to spend money. That level has been set at £2 million. £2 million probably for some time, certainly as long as I've been here, so over 8 years. I think we now find ourselves in sort of new territory, really. Clearly, the pandemic is still ongoing. None of us are 100% sure when we will come out of the pandemic, and none of us can be sure on what normal will look like following the pandemic. What will be the impact on our services, whether that's mental health, social care services, or other services that we run? What will be the impact on parts of our finances? Will income levels in areas like car parking return to normal? Again, none of us quite know for sure. So I think there are a number of significant new risks, and I think for existing risks, the risk profile looks quite different. On that basis, I'm recommending that we increase that minimum level from £2 million to £3 million, simply to reflect the changing risk profile, but also to reflect the fact that this year we are spending 2.6 million. We plan to spend 2.6 million more than the funding we're getting in. So that really shows that in any given year, pressures can emerge to the level that we're talking about. So those are my key messages as Section 151 officer. As Councillor Brown said, the budget is still in draft form. The government may make some tweaks. It has happened before when the government has come under pressure from authorities like ours before. It has made some changes and found some additional funding between the draft and final stage. So it is possible. But as for now, we go with the draft budget we have. It will go out to consultation for the next couple of weeks, and then we'll return in February following the scrutiny meetings to make some decisions on the final budget. That's all I wanted to say, Councillor Brown. Back to you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. I think it's looking at the council tax, and it's been a difficult decision for me given the pressures we're under. And I recognise that we should be maximising income and minimising costs. But I also recognise that we have many of our residents in difficult circumstances in the next 12 months, given the impact of COVID. And therefore, the recommendation of 2.99% is made on that basis. It's not made on the basis of absolute finance. But we will listen to members, we'll listen to residents, hear what they have to say on that particular point. Having said that, I can assure both members of Cabinet, officers and residents that both myself and the leader are lobbying extremely hard at government level. We thank Alicia Cairns, our MP, for setting up meetings for us to talk to key movers and shakers in government. And we will making our case very clearly that we are an efficient organisation, that we don't spend money, we don't increase council tax needlessly, but unfortunately we find ourselves in this position we're in, and we look to government to certainly support us this year, not in future years, but this year in these circumstances. So that will be the message that we're going forward. Just finishing off the rest of the report, Leader. Clearly, there has been impact in COVID on our budget. We've got additional costs related to leisure by maintaining the leisure facilities. And of course, sadly, that's closed again. But we have that paper's come to Cabinet previously. On waste, we've had to extend the contract, or the contracts plural on waste. We have a number of contracts. And we're going through a full tendering exercise. There's an impact of about £400,000 on that. There's also an impact on recycling costs. We're seeing the value of the materials that we recycle declining, and therefore the income we get for that declining. And that's an impact on our costs. Fee income, clearly, as Sava said, car parking has already been significantly lower than expected for very obvious reasons, and will be. We expect next year, we still expect some impact on that. We've had staffing pressures relating to add additional resource because of the issues. And I think you just need to look in Sav's area on business grants. We're currently, I think, running with 7 different business grants that we're having to deal with and clarify. And it's certainly complicated enough for us as officers and portfolio holder. I feel very sorry for the businesses themselves trying to weave their way through those business grants. But that's required additional support in that area as well. And of course, the reduction in income from the government. Having said that, already within this budget, officers have put forward £386,000 of the savings, all of which are recurring. Sorry. So these will continue in subsequent years, and those are detailed in the report. We are concerned about additional pressures, particularly in adult social care and children's. We're seeing issues there. We're concerned about the lack of referrals, particularly in children's area, which is of worry. So these are continuing pressures we may see coming through next year. Moving to the capital programme, I think you'll note that the capital programme is fairly modest for next year for other obvious reasons. We're concentrating on a revenue front. We still have our 10 million in for investment. We will retain that. It's highly unlikely that that will come forward in the near future, given the uncertainty in those particular markets to obtain a return, a sensible return in the near future. School funding, you will note that we receive a very large sum of money, £27 million for school funding. However, that is in and out. All the money that comes in that school funding, bar for a small proportion, goes straight back out to schools as part of the formula funding. We do retain money for high needs, part of that. However, having said that, we do have a significant deficit on our high needs fund. 18 months ago, that sat at £250,000. It now sits at £700,000. And again, this is us, we have to deal with these matters. We can't ignore them. Therefore, we have to spend that money. And we will need to produce a recovery plan by June 2020. Sadly, the government recognises that this is their deficit and not ours, but they've not made it clear how that deficit will be recovered. And we are concerned about that. So there's a £700,000 liability sitting on our balance sheet, which we are not certain how the government or when the government will recover that money. As far as alternative options are concerned, there's a lot of alternative options, and that's the reason that we'd like to hear from members, from residents, and understand what options they would like us to take, or consider at least, in our finalisation of the budget as we move forward to the council meeting in February. So I've finished there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions from members of Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown, and Sav Dalla for a comprehensive explanation of the draft. Do we have any questions or comments from Cabinet members? David, you have your hand up, followed by Lucy.
Just an observation, if I may. We are very fortunate in Rutland to have two excellent stewards of our finances in my learned colleague, Councillor Brown, and Director Sav Rocker. The message that you've articulated today is very clear, and we must take that forward. There are tactics to be operated within government or with government, but I'm sure we have got your message loud and clear, and now we will do our very best to push forward in the manner that you suggest.
Okay. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo Mr. Wilby's comments. We are incredibly lucky in our portfolio holder and director of resources going through really, really difficult times. The 3 points I wanted to make, thank you so much for the lobbying. Personally, I think it is reasonable for a cap to be set that no more than 65% of any authority revenue budget can come from the public. They are already paying taxes into the national pot. I think Rutland for too long has worked hard and then almost has felt as though we're being punished on that one. The biggest take home for me though is the reshape and reprioritisation of services. And I really hope members of the public will fully engage with the future Rutland conversation and also with the consultation to this budget. All too often we pick up public comments on social media and debate where it's a very one-way conversation. I really hope members of the public will take the opportunity to engage with Rutland County Council so that as we go forward, it really is a partnership working to safeguard the future of this county. We've got hard times ahead and we need all eyes and brains on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I was actually just thinking that the paper that we discussed at Council last night, which was the Future Rutland Conversation, actually can play a part in helping to have that discussion with our residents about, you know, how best to manage the budget and take it forward. So Mark and I can take that as one of the things we can get to take forward with that. Are there any other comments or information we need on this? Are we happy to go to the vote?
Chair, can we be explicit about a seconder, please?
Oh, sorry, yes, I need a seconder. I'm happy to do that. Oh, we've got 3 seconders. Thank you. So if we, do you want me to read out the recommendations? Would that help? Yes. The Cabinet approves for consultation the general fund budget of 42.4 million for 2021, detailed in section 3. An increase in council tax of 1.99% with a further 1% for the adult social care precept of the 3% available over 2 years. The capital programme as detailed in section 6. Creation of a new earmarked reserve for ash dieback, 500,000 as per para 3.5.9, and the minimum reserve level to be increased from 2 million to 3 million to reflect the changing risk profile. So are we happy to go to the vote? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brown.
Chair, I just noticed that there's a typographical error in that particular recommendation. It should be the budget for 21-22, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh,
2021. So can we just note that that's changed to that, sort of making the right year.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, can we make sure that gets included in going forward? The trouble is we deal with so many figures, it's sometimes difficult to spot the simple ones, isn't it? So thank you very much. So Emma, are you happy to go to the roll call for me?
Thank you. So Councillor Hemsley?
In favour?
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson?
For.
And Councillor Wilby?
For.
Unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move to item 9, which is the Treasury Management Strategy. And are you taking the starter point on this, Councillor Brown? You're on mute at the moment.
Yes, I am. I'm going to take Treasury Management Strategy and Capital Investment Strategy together. The recommendation to Council is to approve the Treasury Management Strategy as shown in Appendix 1 and the Capital Investment Strategy, which is unchanged from the approved version last year. The report sets out the statutory reports expected in relation to Treasury and capital investment. Both the Treasury Management and Capital Investment Strategy have been prepared in line with the guidance. That's the Prudential Code for Capital Finance, Treasury Management Code of Practice, Minimum Revenue Position, Guidance on Local Authority Investments, and the SIPFA Prudential Property Investment. The Treasury Management Strategy outlines the Council's approach to Treasury Management. It's largely unchanged from last year, and I'll only focus on the changes. There's no change in the approach to borrowing. There's no changes to Treasury management practices either. The only changes relate to the list of countries approved for investment, and those are based on sovereign ratings, AA++, and the higher remains the same. So the only change, I say, is the Treasury report that we did in 05-2020, which explained those changes in relation to our risk profile. And now we're happy with that risk profile. That was also reviewed, I think, at the last Cabinet meeting in December or November. As far as the capital investment strategy is concerned, again, this is updated, but only to reflect the SIPFA issuing the new Prudential Property Investment Guidance. There are no changes to the Council's investment strategy other than that. There's no changes to the capital either. However, the government has raised serious concerns about councils borrowing to invest in commercial properties. We've actually seen quite a few councils suffering from that during COVID, where the investment or the income from that investment is declining rapidly. The government recently published consultation results on that, and the key change is to restrict the use of borrowing for purely commercial investments outside of council boundaries. Fortunately, our council's investment strategy requires in-county investment for regeneration reasons. So the change in lending terms will not impact the way our council intends to operate. No formal consultation is required on these documents. However, SIPFA encourages scrutiny to have a look at these prior to council approval, and that'll happen at the 2 meetings scheduled already. That'll be up to scrutiny to look at those if they wish. And therefore, Chair, I propose, as recommended, the Treasury Management Strategy and the Capital Investment Strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments or thoughts? I don't see any hands up on this. No, I do notice that the government and some of the reports I've been reading is that there's going to be big pressure on those organisations that have invested unwisely in various options. And I think the pressures of today and the COVID have highlighted some of those risks. So I think, are we happy to go to the vote on this? I'm sorry, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you.
Correct. The Cabinet recommends to Council the Treasury Management Strategy in Appendix 1, including the investment strategy, borrowing strategy, minimum reserve position statement, and capital expenditure and prudential indicators, and B, the capital investment strategy, which is unchanged from that approved last year in Report 05-2020. So are we happy to go to the vote, please, Emma?
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Hemsley?
In favour?
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson?
For.
And Councillor Wilby?
For.
Many thanks.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 10, which is fees and charges. So we will, who's presenting on that? Is it Councillor Brown again? You're working hard today, Gordon.
Yeah, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 papers to present today. Yes, so the recommendation is that Cabinet approves the level of fees and charges, notes that taxi and private hire vehicle licence fees will be subject to a further consultation and discussion, and that will be brought back in due course. And also to note that weekly residential care rates are subject to a separate report, which will be brought to Cabinet in due course. The purpose of this report is to set out the fees and charges for services provided by the Council in the coming year. Fees and charges represent a significant proportion of income for the Council, working at about £4 million in a normal year. So it's important that we set the fees and charges at the right level, both in terms of our residents and the income for the authority. Fees and charges need to be approved in order to be effective from April. In reviewing these levels of fees, various approaches have been adopted. For services where costs are primarily staff-based, the Council has based the increase on staff cost inflation. With the potential for a pay pause in the public sector, the Council is working to a figure of 2% compared to the 4.5% last year. There are a small number of fees where no increase is proposed. Typically, this is because there's been a recent increase, or where increases may negatively impact on yield, where there's minimal income anyway. In some areas, fees have increased in line with those charged by neighbouring authorities where we share services, or to cover costs related with the service delivery. And those costs would be above that 2% figure. Turning to the adult social care, for 21-22, the fees payable by service users will be aligned to those paid by the Council. And it is the intention that the maximum home care rate payable by an individual is proposed to mirror the lowest residential care rate, which is linked. It is proposed that this remains the same for 21-22. In the Places Directorate, there have been some significant increases in charges, particularly in highways, where we are coming in line with Leicestershire County Council and also Peterborough. Examples of that are the skips, unlicensed skips in particular, a new charge for that. Also for the suspension of parking bays, a charge for that. This is in charge of the skip permit charge. A change to the Section 50 licence, we will be charging a new charge of £150 per 200 metres for works in excess of 200 metres. So that's for extensive utilities works in particular. And for temporary load closures of more than 5 days, that'll be increased from £800 to £1,200. Taxes, these have been increased by 2%, but the fees and the fee structure will be subject to a change on an outcome of forthcoming consultation. It had been planned to hold that consultation during this current year, but due to COVID, that has been delayed, mainly because we want to meet with the taxi operators directly, if we possibly can, and also because of the impact on their businesses in the short term. Waste management, the Council previously agreed to an increase in the green waste charge by £5 to £40, recalling that we have not increased that green waste charge since it was implemented in 2017, when the first decision was made on that green waste charge. Parking, there's no changes planned on parking, but we will do a parking review. As a major parking review being carried out by Councillor Stevenson and the highway staff during the spring, and that will come back to Council and Cabinet in due course. Reprographic costs, we're aiming to cover our direct material plus overheads in reprographics, and we are trying as far as we possibly can to eliminate paper within the organisation. And I know during the COVID, this has been very successful. So I think we want to maintain that moving forward to reduce those costs moving forward. Noting that we will continue to recharge parishes for parish elections between the major elections, and that'll continue. Of course, there are no elections planned until at least May 2021, and even that is in doubt. We're looking for advice from government on that at this point in time. The proposals that we're putting forward this morning will be considered by the scrutiny panels in January as part of the budget setting, and we will move forward from there. So that is the fees and charges, Leader, and I propose the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any comments? David?
No, I think it's all reads well and logically.
Fantastic.
And I'm happy to second the motion.
You're happy to second it? Excellent. Thank you very much. That saves me getting into trouble later. So I think if we don't have any more comments on it, then I think we go to the vote, if that's okay. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you. So Councillor Hemsley?
In favour?
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
And Councillor Wilby?
For.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Welcome back, Councillor Stevenson. We now move on to item 11, which is the private sector housing renewal policy, including disabled adaptations. And this, I believe, is Councillor Brown is leading on this at this moment. Is that right, or is that?
I am, yes. It's actually a joint report from myself, Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Walters, as it covers all three of our areas. The recommendation is that the Cabinet approves the revised private sector housing policy. This policy is a document which was previously held by the Council, was first introduced in 2017 and is due for review in 2021. It considers private stock condition in Rutland as well as disabled adaptations for all tenures. It reflects the opportunities of the Better Care Fund, which is a government-funded programme separate to the local government settlement, and helps to keep the Council's responsibilities under the Care Act 2014. There is a statutory requirement under Article 3 of the Regulatory Reform Housing Assistant Order 2002, which gives authorities the power to provide assistance to any person for the purpose of improving living conditions in the local authority area. This clause allows assistance provided in the form, but also contains certain restrictions. Now, this ties in very much with our philosophy of intervention, where we wish to intervene to maintain residents living at home for as long as possible in safe environments. This has certainly impacted on our adult social care costs. While we may spend more on the intervention part, we certainly save a lot of money on the later part of support for adult social care because people can stay at home for longer. The current policy, that's the policy that previously in place, introduced the housing, health and provision grants, and these are ranged from 10,000, sorry, they'll be reduced to 5,000, although exceptionally 6,000. This is in line with our experiences. Grants larger than this were generally means tested through the DFG, which is part of the BCF, the Better Care Fund. The policy does not include grants for minor adaptations, which are covered by other policies. In paragraph 2.6, there is a housing MOT check delivered across Rutland by Longhurst Group on our behalf, regardless of property tenure, whether that be social or private. We provide information, advice and support for people to help them maintain their independence and live as safely as possible in their own homes, as long as they choose to do so. And again, this is part of our intervention programme to minimise that. This document has already been consulted on with our partners. We had an event in February 2020, and where a place-based approach to health and care was discussed, including preventive measures. So it has been subject of some consultation already. There are alternatives. The alternative is not to offer discretionary grants, but failure to do so would leave people potentially at risk from unsuitable properties, increasing the risk of hospital admissions, delaying transfer of care from hospital, and increasing our costs ultimately in supporting these individuals in later life. The HAP grant was introduced as Rutland residents were feeling prohibitive means tests for adaptations, and we felt it was important through our intervention process to reduce that. it has been successful in fulfilling this requirement, and reintroducing means test would have an impact on our intervention and preventative work. The policy does not permit means testing, but for these reasons, sorry, it does permit means testing. For these reasons, it's not undertaken at the moment, as it's working extremely well. The report does not amend any approved budgets. The budget's already in place this year and proposed for next year. But we do have a duty to keep housing conditions under review in our area, and that is what we are doing. Leader, I would propose the recommendation that we approve the revised private housing sector renewal policy as presented.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments on this? No, I'm happy to second it. So are we happy to go straight to the vote? Thank you. So Emma, can I hand over to you for a vote?
Well, thank you. So Councillor Hemsley.
In favour?
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Stevenson.
She's on mute at the moment.
She's actually frozen, I think.
Yeah, I think she is frozen.
She's back.
She's back. Sorry, can I just take that again?
Yeah, I'm in favour.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. And Councillor Wilby.
For.
Many thanks, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much for that. We now move on to item 12, which is the leisure review project commencement, which I believe is Councillor Stevenson, as long as she hasn't frozen.
Rather a Wi-Fi pressure with lessons.
Councillor Stevenson, can I suggest you maybe turn off the camera, and that will then restrict bandwidth use, and maybe we'll get a clearer voice coming through.
You need to just come off mute.
Oh.
That's good.
There we go. We can hear you, Councillor Stevenson.
Oh, you can hear me. I'm actually just walking to a better bit of the house.
Thank you. We'll bear with you.
Right, apologies. Can you hear me clearly there?
We can.
We can.
Brilliant. Right, I'm not going to read out the recommendations. They're there in front of you. As we've heard from the budget paper, this is a timely request. How we deliver services, what we intend to deliver, is absolutely crucial to look at incredibly thoroughly. It ties in with our future Rutland conversation, and actually the context of the pandemic providing a watershed moment really does place a sort of backdrop where we have to look at this very thoroughly and very seriously. As you'll see in the paper, the starting point does have to be a needs analysis. Emphasis is on need. It isn't a question of what we want, it is what we need. And of course, how that sits with other key elements, such as meeting the health and well-being needs of our residents. We're really lucky in Rutland because we have a very broad range of sports clubs and dedicated individuals and organisations who will assist with this process, forming a key stakeholder group. The other context that we need to think about is, of course, how we access sport and fitness. We've become very used to, in the last 20 or 30 years, that a sports provision or a health and well-being provision automatically involves a facility as the norm. We're deliberately using the word provision. The role of technology, whether it's the Joe Wicks effect of accessing health classes online or apps on watches, phones, etc., has had a massive impact. Whether that is a continued behaviour change, only time will tell. And that's the other key thing with this. Actually, the market is really, really uncertain. We're still mid-pandemic. It looks as though it's going to go on for a while. This report enables us for things to settle down and do that thorough needs analysis. we need to pass this so that we have a measured, holistic proposal to be developed. And that is really explaining the need for a further 1-year contract extension. However, we won't use it if we don't need to. The other thing that hasn't been explicitly mentioned in the report, and it almost goes without saying, but I will be bringing this up with the project board, is the environmental element, the impact on climate change, and that costs not just financial. I will be taking that to the project board to discuss how that can be included in our further work. I'm happy to take questions on that. Apologies for being a little disjointed with my sudden move of location. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Stevenson. Do we have any questions or comments on this? Councillor Brown, you have your hand up.
Yes, Chair. Just recognising the comments I made earlier in terms of our finances in the next 12, 18 months and even longer. I know we're going to be spending money to carry out this needs analysis, and I just ask, can we minimise that as far as we possibly can?
Absolutely. And also, sorry, I didn't say in my introduction, Chair, which I think is very relevant. This isn't simply a case of saying we'll stop spending money on it. It's a really complex contract. So even if we stop providing any provision at all, not that I'm recommending that, we would still have to pay for the cost of maintaining the physical buildings, etc. So it is incredibly complex, hence needing this paper to go through to enable a sensible, measured approach going forwards.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? I assume you're happy to propose this paper, and I'm happy to second it. If there are no more questions, then can we please go to the roll call on it, Emma?
Of course. Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Hemsley?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson?
For.
And Councillor Wilby?
For.
Thank you very much. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much for that. We now move on to item 13, which is the Highways Transport Working Group process, which is Lucy Stevenson again, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thought I'd give Councillor Brown a break by having 2 papers back to back. Right, in front of you, you have got the process for Highways Transport Working Group. It's perhaps unusual to ask for Cabinet support and approval for a process. This simply is because actually this work is really, really high profile. It's something that I know all of us in this room will have had emails from parish councils, residents, etc., expressing concerns or raising concerns about a range of highways issues. Therefore, how we deliver that service is it's really important that we do it as well as possible with a focus on delivering to our residents. Obviously, it's important that we mention that this sits within the broad picture of our highways network. We've obviously got the capital maintenance programme. We've got Fix My Street for people to address or raise issues where things are broken or need repairing. Ultimately, our aim is to have a highways network that is as safe as possible for all highways users. So I think it is important to remember the context for that. You will note in the recommendations that we will be bringing the financial side of this in the integrated transport programme through to Cabinet in March. I will now just draw your attention to a couple of key parts of the process, which I'm hoping will finesse the process and deliver as well as possible for our residents. As you're aware, that the new process has been in place since autumn 2018. The good news story with it is that it has enabled far more concerns to be raised in a far more timely fashion. Rather than an annual report, it's been an ongoing process covering a financial year. The good news has also brought about a challenge, which is simply that of the volume of concerns that we're dealing with. The pandemic absolutely exacerbated that, but I still think it was, or it is an issue that has arisen before that. The backlog brought on by the pandemic is absolutely part and parcel of demonstrating the problem. So this process, the key aim is to make sure that requests are dealt with in a timely fashion, that any outcomes from those requests are supported by our policy, and that our process is consistent. So with that in mind, we are introducing 4 clear categories which are outlined in 3.17. I know you can read, so I won't read them out. Clear timeframes that are also covered under section 3. And of course, in terms of being supported by policy, one of the key policies is our road safety guide, which is clearly closely linked with DFT guidelines. There are 2 other things that I would like to draw to your attention before I'm happy to take questions. Meetings, I would like those to be more like, as it were, a planning committee, where we deal with items that are contentious. Contentious might be that a parish council disagrees with our expertise, what our officers say. That will then give an opportunity for them to be discussed thoroughly with input from knowledgeable experts, including the police and blue light. Otherwise, what I would describe colloquially as no-brainers will be determined under delegated powers, and that should actually speed things up and make things a bit more efficient. The other thing is the unrecorded accidents. When we look at a concern at initial stage, we will look at what the accident data is that we have on record. This invariably brings or a source of contention between parishes, because parishes will have a recollection of accidents which don't count as formal accidents because there were no blue light, there was no blue light presence. It's therefore not on record. A good example of this is actually the A47 near Uppingham. Quite a few cars have come off through a hedge. It's not recorded as an accident, but it is quite clear that an incident has taken place. Therefore, we want to enable parishes to be able to log those incidents in inverted commas so that they can also inform that initial assessment of determining, is there really a problem here? And finally, communication will be an underpinning thing as well. How we communicate with the parishes and the ward members, really, really important. It is a demand-led service in some respects, and we do want to place the residents of Rutland at the forefront of that. I'm very happy to take questions. I am just going to ask a child to switch off a noise on a laptop because I've got a Formula 1 car going in the background, which is a little distracting.
I trust it's not going too fast. Gordon, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Yes, Chair, a couple of matters. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Stevenson on the work she's done this last 18 months with the officers and the officers' work as well. Clearly, we had a period of nearly 3 years where this work was very slow and not progressing. But as you can see from this report, we've had significant items completed in the last 18 months, and thank you to her and the officers for that work. And also it's recognised, and I'm sure all parishes will recognise, that given COVID, it's not been possible to carry out the work in the normal way, particularly with the checking speeds and volumes of vehicles because of the traffic not being on the roads again, as we are now. So I think many parishes recognise that, and I think we have to live with that in the short term. Coming to the point where I do thank you for pointing out the police data not being accurate. Well, we've known this for some time, and the police seem not to want to record data, even though it's reported to them. they don't want to record that as well, unless it's a killed or seriously injured incident. And that is rather sad, because I think we could get much better data and therefore much more robust data to make our decisions on. Having said that, I think one of the things that is very important is we must get speed watch going in more parishes around our county. As you know, I had discussions with the local inspector, Audrey Danvers, and she is supportive of that. And I'd ask Councillor Stevenson and our highways team, our community safety partnership team, to put pressure on to get more parishes. We've got the capital to provide the equipment. It just requires the police to support us in terms of risk assessments, to carry out the work and get moving and get more data. That'll help parishes to understand the real speed of vehicles travelling through their community. I think it's very easy to think that a tractor doing 25 miles an hour is actually hammering along at 35 or 40 miles an hour because of the noise and size. And I know from my experience that once you start to realise that, it starts to change the opinions of parish councillors. So can I implore upon both Councillor Stevenson and our Director of Places that we get speed watch moving as quickly as possible after COVID is cleared, and get that moving forward. The other piece of concern I have is with police advice on Highways Transport Working Group. I am concerned that from time to time they tend to take a negative view of any physical barriers that we may suggest in improving speed or reducing speed in villages. I think this is something we need to question with the police in particular. I recognise that blue light services need to be able to move freely through each of these restrictions, but it is only by having physical barriers that ultimately we will reduce speed. There's clear evidence that speed indicators and other things have a temporary impact, but in the long term, people ignore them or don't even see them, which is worse, and still speed. As we know from the camera van sitting in Ketton, we have a speed indicator, but we still catch people speeding another 100 yards beyond that. So I think it's important that we have those physical barriers as far as possible. So thank you, and my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Absolutely noted and supported about the community speed watch. I think, again, partnership working as a general principle has to be the way ahead. And actually, to use the word conversation, it is actually a two-way conversation. It's not just about us saying, well, this is what the DFT guidelines say. It's also about getting a shared understanding in terms of sort of police support for things. I'm very keen that anything that we do is supported by our own policy, which is informed with DFT. At no point do I want to put the authority at risk of insurance claims because we've made a bad call from a technical engineering point of view. However, I do take your point that actually a physical barrier obviously does stop somebody speeding. Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Councillor Wilby, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Leader. I'd just like to endorse and commend Councillor Stevenson for the huge amount of work and the human face that she's put on the whole of the traffic problems that we've got. And you've done that whilst the department has been going through some pretty rocky stages. So really, really well done. And I'm delighted that as I live on the racetrack between Stamford and Bourne, and I've had 3 people through my hedge, none of which I'm sure have been recorded, that we are now, you know, reverting to a bit of local folklore, recording those accidents locally. And I couldn't endorse Councillor Brown's speeding thing any harder. Speeding is a real problem.
Thank you for those comments. And I was talking to a resident in Langham who was complaining about cars parked on the side of the road, and we carried on talking at socially distanced, I will hasten to add. And then he worked out that if you remove the cars from parked on the side of the road, making a physical barrier, then you'd end up with a speeding problem. So it is very true that physical barriers do ensure that we have slower speeds. So it's working out how to combine them in the right format to make sure we can take it through. So are you, David, I assume that's your residual hand that's on the screen. Yeah, that's fine. So are we happy? I assume Lucy's proposing this. I'm a seconder. I'm happy to second it, even though I sit on the Highways Transport Working Group with Lucy. I think it's a very good piece of work. So can we please go to the roll call, Emma?
Oh, thank you. So Councillor Hemsley.
In favour.
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson.
For.
And Councillor Welby.
In favour.
Lovely, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much. We now have the next two reports could potentially lead to exclusion of the press and public. I would like to try and avoid that. So if we can, we will continue without having to go into exempt. So we're on to item 14, which is the Rutland Radio project, and I'm leading on this one. So our previous CEO back in July 2020, after a conversation with the new owners of Rutland Radio, was advised that there was going to be less truly local content in the radio. The benefit that we as a community have had for over 20 years has been access to local, real-time information, as well as a record and celebration of our community and the lives of those that live here. With how long COVID has and will affect us, for this will be even more important in the future. The project was always going to be about the feasibility of a local radio station, and clearly it would be unlikely to be a commercial one as economies of scale could not be delivered. There was an independent board that was set up, and this report is the result of the first phase of the feasibility study. It's now time for the findings to be tested so that, if correct, the radio station can be set up and deliver truly local content that is real-time accurate for our community. The independent board have provided their findings, which are attached to this report, and I would like to thank them for all of the many hours and due diligence that they have committed to this project. A good balance of these projections give me confidence that the ask to transfer the remains of the budget that was allocated to the Community Interest Company is entirely the right thing to do for Rutland. This will ensure that we have the best chance of a truly local radio station to celebrate our community into the future. I'm happy to take comments or thoughts on that, please. Any? Councillor Brown.
Chair, I think Cabinet have debated this both at Cabinet briefings and other times, and I think we have come to the conclusion that this is the best route for Rutland to assist the setting up of this community radio project. I support it. I think it's the right thing to do. I think we've got a very capable person in Rob Persani to lead the broadcasting from that radio station, and that's great, and he's well known in our community and highly valued from his previous work. So I think the other thing that encourages me is we've got a very strong potential board for the Community Interest Company, and the people who have put their names forward have a great deal of experience, not just in business, but in radio as well. And I think that's very valuable. So I think we're putting together something here which could be very exciting. I think the money we're giving in terms of grant to the project will be well used. Having seen the exempt papers in terms of the business plan that they put together, I think that's well put together, and I look forward to listening to Rutland sounds in the not too distant future.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, very briefly, to echo Councillor Brown's comments, I support this. Like Councillor Brown, I was very encouraged to see the list of names on the board. I think there's a raft of expertise and experience there. And I think the point within the paper, which is about offering local content for local people, is really important. And this is the best chance of enabling that in a sort of homegrown grassroots fashion. So I fully support the recommendation.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm obviously happy to recommend it, and I guess Lucy or Gordon.
Sorry, Oliver, I think Councillor Wilby has his hand up too.
Councillor Wilby, sorry, I missed that. Councillor Wilby, sorry, not ignoring you, sir.
No, sorry, it was just to endorse what was said. I think in the world we live in, communication is key, and particularly in a rural environment, that we have a local radio station which can keep everyone in the picture, help loneliness, all sorts of things. It really, really is important that we use a bit of vision and try and make sure that we can get a service that will run efficiently. And I think this is a good move forward.
Thank you. So I'm going to just read out the recommendations on this. That Cabinet A1 approves the issuing of a grant to the Rutland Stamford Sound Community Interest Company, or the KIC. Approves the transfer of ownership of any items purchased for the project from the budget allocated to the project to the KIC. Endorses the completion of the remainder of the project by the KIC. And finally, authorises Director for Resources to instruct the Head of Human Resources to complete the necessary steps in the process to facilitate the transfer of the project manager post in accordance with 2P to the radio project KIC in as short a time frame as possible, and not to oppose the transfer. So I'm happy to propose that. I think if I have a second, thank you, Lucy. Can we please go to the vote?
Thank you. So Councillor Hemsley.
In favour.
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson.
For.
And Councillor Wilby.
For.
Many thanks.
Thank you very much for that. We now move on to item 15, which is spending of commuted sums for affordable housing. And I believe this falls to Councillor Brown again.
Yes, it does, Chair. This is a recommendation to Cabinet to approve a grant of £650,000 to the Platform Housing Group to develop a former allotments at Brook Road, Oakham, subject to planning consent and a satisfactory funding agreement. And also for the Treasury Director to be authorised to conclude the funding agreement in consultation with the portfolio holder for planning and finance. Cabinet members will recall back in 2017, November 2017, we considered a report regarding the spending of commuted sums for affordable housing. Cabinet approved in principle use of affordable housing commuted sum towards this site on Brook Road, the former allotment site, which has extant planning permission for development. It is now clarified that Platform Housing Group, formerly known as De Montfort Waterloo, are expected to acquire that site and to develop it wholly as an affordable housing, for affordable housing, subject to planning obviously and the funding. The new properties are required to last for at least 60 years. Platform already have 200 affordable homes in Rutland, so they're already in Rutland, and we have well experienced with them. There is further information that's exempt, but I won't go into that just now. Additional information provided is regarded sufficient for the Council to provide the grant of £650,000 to the Platform. The financial implications are that the Council currently holds £932,000 in developer contributions for affordable homes, of which £701,000 can only be spent in Oakham and Barleythorpe because of the terms of the Section 106 legal agreements. The grant is £650,000 out of that 701. Further money has already been committed to developments in Oakham at our meeting on the 17th of November. The plan is to negotiate further with Platform Housing Group to ensure that the benefit schemes are maximised and address identified. We have broad heads of terms, but we obviously need to go through the detail. There is an issue which I'd like to bring the monitoring officer in a moment, and that relates to state aid. This is well above my pay grade, and it is with the change to the Brexit effect and the new state aid issues. There have been new information presented, and I shall ask the the monitoring officer just to comment on the state aid position, please, before I continue with the report.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Just to reassure Cabinet that we are able to manage the state aid implications. Were the grant to be done wrong, then it could result in state aid compliance issues. We are very well satisfied that we are able to manage that. We are taking external legal advice, and I am aware of a large number of schemes similar to this throughout the country that have been delivered successfully without any state aid problems, so that any legal technicalities around that can be fully managed. Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Yeah, just to note that we've already had the grant agreement sent to our excellent solicitors for advice on it, and we'll make sure that we follow that advice. The draft agreement that I talked about earlier includes a schedule of the types and tenures of property proposed to be built and the need to meet regulatory requirements. Also includes timescales for development, and the detail of the agreement is subject to final negotiation and the planning process, but it does envisage that the start will happen later this year, with completion by July 2023 and a long stop date by 2034, just in case. The suggested terms of payment have been changed from that in the report. We're now looking at 4 tranches of 25% rather than the 50%. The scheme will also be subject to Homes England funding requirements, which fortunately we have some experience with Homes England in recent months, and so we understand the substantial assurance that that'll give as the authority in this particular case. So those are the key points I'd like to raise, Chair. If there's any questions in the non-exempt elements, I'd be happy to discuss them. But I can assure members of the public that we're aiming to have 28 socially rented and 12 shared ownership on this site. I think it's a major step forward to meet our commitment to deliver affordable homes, and I propose the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilby, you have your hand up.
Yes, if I may, just to make an observation, I think it's a brilliant step forward. I think we need to make more provision for affordable houses. I just hope that as this is going to be the forerunner of some of the other big building projects that we've got in the county, that care is taken to make sure that when we finish this development, that we can stand back and be really proud of what we've produced and built, and that we've made a good residential area for folks to live in at a reasonable cost.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or thoughts on this? I think it is really good that we've actually now committed to addressing some of the issues of affordable housing. We've had this sitting here for a little time, so it's good that we've got something in progress. So on that, I'm happy to second this. The spending of committed sums that Cabinet approves a grant of £650,000 to the Platform Housing Group for the development of the former allotments on Brook Road, Oakham, subject to planning consent and satisfactory funding agreement. And 2, that the Strategic Director Places be authorised to conclude the funding agreement in consultation with the portfolio holder for planning and finance. So if we're happy with that, I would like to go to the vote, please, Emma.
Thank you. So, Councillor Hemsley?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor Stevenson?
For.
And Councillor Wilby?
For.
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. That is the end of our business. So I close the meeting at 11:28. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.